So it's been another busy year in the AP testing department, and there's been a lot of new cameras launched, and we're here to talk about our favourites and the highlights of the year. So what's been a highlight for you, Andy?
So I think we've seen quite a lot of amazing new cameras. We've also seen a few which are rather nondescript. I think where we should probably start is Nikon. And first of all with the Z8, which we saw earlier in this year. And the Z8 is essentially everything that you get in a Z9, the flagship, extraordinary camera, just in a smaller and more affordable body. And it is a genuinely phenomenal all-rounder. It'll do absolutely anything you want it to. And it's not ridiculously priced. It's expensive, but it's no worse than any other full-frame flagship.
I mean, compared to its rivals, I guess it's pretty good value.
Yes, if you compare it to something like the Sony Alpha 1, even the Canon EOS R3, it's more affordable, and that's a good thing. That's an advantage that Nikon have deciding to leave out the mechanical shutter, that they've made a camera that's cheaper.
So I guess that leaves a question of who would need to buy a Z9 anymore?
I think that's a very good question. I think for professional sports photographers who value having a really big battery and who want to have the large dual grip design, which allows you to shoot more comfortably in portrait format, gives you generally a better hold when you're using a very large lens, the Z9 makes sense. For everyone else, it's the Z8. The Z8 makes the Z9 look kind of not a great choice for most photographers.
And you can buy the grip for the Z8 anyway if you want to have that vertical shooting, but then of course it makes the price differential not so great.
The price goes up, but you know it's a nice option to have that, to have the idea that you can add a grip when you want to use it, but then not use it when you want that slightly more portable package.
You've got longer continuous record times, I think, haven't you, the Z9? But there isn't really a very long list of reasons to buy a Z9 anymore.
Yes, if you want extremely long video record times, the Z9 is better. But you're talking, going over 2 hours. That kind of difference. This is quite niche stuff.
So what else about it? Well, I mean, is there anything else about the Z8, or do we move on to the Nikon's other...
Well, I think the other thing we should talk about actually is the Zf, which we've got in front of us. Which to me is a camera I really, really wanted to like, but ended up just being a little bit of a near miss. And I know you've been using it, so what did you make of it?
Yeah, I liked it, but I guess as someone that's been using Nikon for a long time, I started with the FM and then the FA and used those sort of cameras, and I still have a big affection for those cameras. And I've been saying for years and years, Nikon need to bring out a camera that has that kind of feel to it. And obviously they've had a couple of other attempts. There's sort of the DF, which was just a monstrously big camera, the ZFC, which was a little bit plasticky, but also didn't have the lens support. So I thought this is finally, they've got there. And this is probably the closest they've come, but it is, as you're right, there are some frustrations with it. I think the thing that I found using this is that even though I thought I wanted to go back to that 70s, 80s style of shooting, because I spent the last 20 years shooting a DSLR style way with the hand gripper and the dials, that's now muscle memory, is to use the dials. So even though I have a manual shutter speed on the top, and even if I had an aperture ring, which there isn't of course, I would still instinctively default to using the rear and front dials all the time. And if you use both, if you try to use both the new way of shooting and the old way of shooting, you end up getting very confused. And then you end up finding, why isn't this happening? Why can't I turn this? I would find myself unable to change the shutter speed on the flat dial, on the back dial. And then I'd realise, oh, that's because I've got the manual shutter speed down the top. You've got to set the shutter speed to the, to sort of auto setting first before you can use the rear dial. And so things like that, if you have to kind of pick, am I going to shoot it old school way, or am I going to shoot DSLR style way? And if the latter, then you wonder why you'd buy that, I guess. And if you try to mix and match, you end up finding you find I couldn't use the exposure compensation because I didn't have the ISO dial set to the right setting.
Yes, there's all sorts of little bits where the interface isn't as coherent as it might be. To me, it's not as well worked out as a Fujifilm X system, where you've got a better worked out approach to combining the analog controls and particularly you've got an aperture ring on the lenses. All the lenses have an aperture ring in about the same place, and it just makes that experience more coherent. And the ZF is nice. It's a lovely camera. It feels great in your hand, but it's quite heavy and it's quite awkward. And I think you do need that grip on it.
I was going to say, it doesn't feel good in your hand actually until you put the grip on it, but then it kind of transforms it really. So I think if you do want that camera because you like the old school style of shooting and you're going to use that old school style of shooting, you got to spend the 30 odd quid to buy the grip, because any lens bigger than that effectively on that camera without the grip, it makes it quite uncomfortable to hold it.
Yeah, agreed. So a nice camera, but a near miss.
I'd still want an extra grip on the back. This grip is good for the front, but there's still nothing on the back.
Nothing to keep your thumb in place.
On to.
I took it on a trip with me, and I had the 24-120 f4, which is not a massive lens. There are much bigger lenses you can have. It's a reasonable travel lens, but even with that lens, it was without the grip. It was not great fun to use. But you're right. I think a rear grip would have been probably even better.
I also think that they shouldn't be putting plastic backs on sort of £300 lenses. You know, it just, for your very, very, very cheap lenses, sure, but for a £300 lens, I don't think they need to put a plastic back on it. I mean, it probably doesn't make much difference, but still would look nicer. Yeah.
And it is a lens that is trying to look like it's a vintage lens.
Yeah.
It has an aperture ring, but it doesn't.
Yeah, this doesn't move at all, this silver thing, so why?
No.
Why is it there?
What I will say about it is the build quality is fantastic. It's quite surprisingly heavy. It's heavier than it looks, and it's very well made. And it's a beautiful looking camera, and it does. You can use it like the old school if you want to. If you just get it out of your mind about these dials. Don't use these dials. Just stick to that. And then it's obviously you have to use the dial for the aperture. Of course, that's the other thing. But
you don't have to, but otherwise you're using focus ring and lens dials, and it gets.
Well, there isn't one on here, but on the 24-120, I did have the ring set to be an aperture.
You can set the focus ring to control aperture on that lens, but then you can't use it to focus.
Well, yeah.
So,
yes,
it's all.
So it's a nice camera, but it's not quite, close but no cigar.
Yeah.
The phrase.
I think the Fujifilm cameras have really nailed the sort of classic styling, classic controls, and then X-S20 when you've got digital SLR controls. It all just makes sense. Really good handling and a little bit smaller as well, which I quite like.
Yeah, and I think we should talk about the X-S20. That's one of our favourite cameras of the year so far, because it is a really nice price.
Yep.
And it's just really well thought through.
Yeah, I was shooting with it in Malta. Took some amazing photos. You can just take photos and you don't really need to edit them. They just come out looking great. And colour is one of Fujifilm's strong points there. Yeah. Nice camera, compact, lots of video features, open gate, which some people will be interested in. But the stabilization for me isn't really up there with some of the other cameras like Micro Four Thirds. Stabilization for walking around just wasn't really up to the same level as some others. But other than that, everything else was great. Yeah.
Would you choose an XS20 over an XT5? It's cheaper, isn't it, obviously?
I would, yeah. I think I do like the analog controls on the Fuji series, but for me it's size is the main thing, and price as well. And the XS20 is just, one camera does it all. Yeah. And the battery life's much better as well.
I think it's because we all wear glasses. I'm not wearing mine at the moment, but we all wear glasses. So the viewfinder, is that okay in the XS? Because I find the XT5's got a bigger viewfinder, isn't it?
It was good enough for the occasional use. It's not the biggest, but it does the job when you need it. Yeah.
And of course, the other camera which Fuji made this year, which was absolutely sensational, was the GFX100 II. And that's another one where we had a trip to Stockholm for that. And what a camera. It's absolutely incredible. It's expensive. It's going to cost you more than even the most expensive full frame flagship. But what it delivers in terms of image quality, if that's what you need, if you're a high-end professional photographer who just needs 100 megapixels and you know what you're going to do with it, there is really nothing else quite like it. And again, you get all of this same Fujifilm benefit of fantastic color, beautiful film simulations, perfect auto white balance. But here you just got that 100 megapixel image quality and amazing GF lenses. And there's really nothing else quite like it. You can quite easily say who needs it. Can you really see a difference of 100 megapixels over, say, 60 megapixels on the Sony a7R5? The answer is yes, of course you can. There's more pixels there, you get more detail. And if you need it, that camera will deliver it. And it's got fantastic handling, it's got really good image stabilization given the sensor size, it's got the best viewfinder we've ever seen. So I think the GFX100 II, in terms of outright image quality, there's nothing like it.
I think that's the thing with the GFX series, is that when they introduced it, it was like using an established mirrorless camera, and you can walk around the streets, take photos. I use the GFX100 and some of the other cameras, and you'd be taking a photo. You don't need a tripod, you don't need to think you're using a slow camera or a medium format camera. You use it like a normal camera and get amazing photos because of the image stabilization, because of the way Fuji do cameras.
And now on the 100 II, you've got subject detection autofocus, so you've got that extra level of focusing. It's not going to be as good an action camera as a mirrorless all-rounder, even like the Sony a7R5, which is not particularly a camera for action. It's still a lot faster, will still do you better focusing. But if you are, say, a wedding photographer and you want to have a couple walking down the aisle towards you, the GFX will handle that.
I think wedding and portrait pros are probably some of the key audience for it, aren't they? And also, I guess, even for landscape photography, because you want that resolution, you want all those little leaves and blades of grass.
Yeah. And commercial advertising, people who need to take a very big scene and then be able to crop into it and pull details out, you can do it in a way that you just can't quite do with any full frame camera. So yeah, it's absolutely sublime. And sublime to the ridiculous, Fujifilm's other camera of the year. One of your favourites, Josh.
Well, the Instax Pal came along and popped out of nowhere and was just the strangest camera released this year. It's about the size of, I don't know, a 50p piece, and looks like a cartoon character from a Pixar movie. When you use it, it makes noises like a little toy. And it's so cute. It's one of these love-hate things where it just looks like you want it, and then when you use it, it makes no sense at all. It's got a 5 megapixel sensor, and it just doesn't make any sense. You could be, any other camera is going to give you better photos, basically. Any other camera at all, even bad phones will give you better pictures probably. An old iPhone will give you better pictures. So, yeah, and it's £90 as well. So you could buy a cheap mobile phone that's a mobile phone as well as a camera, and it's going to give you higher resolution images. So,
who's it for? What's the audience?
No one knows.
That's the mystery of the camera. Who, if you're maybe a teenager, it's fun. It does look fun, but you connect it to a phone, so you already have a better camera with you. So it is a mystery.
It sort of looks like it's set up purely for 14-year-old girls to take group selfies. And when they've done that once or twice, they'll throw it away and start
it's like
using
a novelty
something better.
Christmas gift, basically. Something you buy with your teenage kids for Christmas.
It's a lot of money for a novelty gift.
I would give my kids a real camera, and they're already using real cameras and getting some really nice photos.
But if you want it for photos, or as opposed to just looking cute and having a talking point, I mean, that's it.
I still want one, just to have on my shelf to look at, but I wouldn't use it.
It is a very, very strange piece of kit, and it makes no sense.
It looks like a tiny sort of cute Disney version of a GoPro, but it's not even a video camera, is it?
No. It doesn't do anything useful.
The real mystery for me is why it has a tripod to it. What's that?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It just makes no sense at all.
Unless you're Isabella, I think she likes it, doesn't she?
I'm not sure she does.
No, she tried it and said, "Don't know who this is for."
Right, okay.
Cute, but who's it for?
Yeah. I think that the Instax as a brand makes some great products, and they're fun. And the fun bit is getting the photo back and having it pop out. And this doesn't do that. So,
yeah. Proper Instax cameras can be great.
Yeah.
Instax printers, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Instax Pal, nah.
No.
Let's stop slacking off Fujifilm and let's move on to Panasonic.
Okay.
So Panasonic had, I think, a really good year. Panasonic came in right at the start of the year with the Lumix S5 II and the S5 IIX, which is the stealth version of it. Grab it. And for the first time, Panasonic put phase detection onto their cameras, and this just makes such a huge difference. Not necessarily in terms of capability, but actually in terms of perception. That now you feel that you can use these cameras for everything, that they'll keep up with moving subjects. You don't have to buy a Sony just in case the autofocus on the Panasonic won't keep up. And so you have, in the S5 II and the S5 IIX, two really nice, well-priced full-frame cameras. And the S5 IIX is a fabulous camera for video as well. I mean, you add extra features like SSD recording. It's a great camera. And then they followed it up with the G9 II in micro four thirds, which is basically the same camera, same body, but in micro four thirds with a really good sensor, really good autofocus, suddenly quite possibly the best micro four thirds camera around. And with different strengths from the smaller sensor, you can carry a really small lens set and do lots.
Image stabilization is going to be really good as well. The smaller sensor helps there, doesn't it?
Yes, it's fantastic. I mean, so the smaller sensor is always better for image stabilization, just observationally. On the S5, S5 II, it's good, but on the G9 II, it's just a level above.
So it is pretty much exactly the same body, isn't it?
It's the same body. There's a couple of tiny detail differences. The S5 II and S5 IIX have got a little fan in the viewfinder housing. That's really clever because it means that they can record extended video times but not have an enormous fan unit sitting out the back like on other cameras. That's not there in the G9 II because micro four thirds sensors don't produce so much heat, so it's not as necessary. Instead, they've put image stabilization sensor gubbins in there, and that's another part of the reason why you get better stabilization.
So Panasonic have had a couple of quiet years, haven't they? And then so people were starting to say, "What's happened to Panasonic? Have they, where have they gone?" In certainly stills photography, but I think this year they've come back. It's like they haven't been sitting on their hands; they've been busy, and they've had a really good year this year, as you say. And we're actually filming on S5 IIX right now, aren't we? So
yeah, and they've got a really nice set of lenses. You've got these small, relatively affordable lenses. You've got the 20 to 60 standard zoom, which is unique and just very nice in giving you that slightly wider view in a kit lens. You've got all of their f1.8 primes, which are perfectly matched in terms of size. They're all small, they're all quite affordable. It's a really nice looking range, and being L mount, you can just use all the Sigma lenses as well, or Leica lenses if you want to push the boat out and spend lots of money.
do you think this is going to give the L mount itself a bit of a boost because it's the mount that gets the least amount of airtime, isn't it? Really?
Yes, and I think that's because they never really had a completely credible mainstream camera, and now it's there. Now that exists. And it's a very, very good camera.
I think people on the internet went wild when Panasonic announced phase detection. All the groups and forums were saying they're going to buy one straight away. It's what people have been waiting for.
Exactly. It just makes so much difference. And the thing is, even if you're just taking portraits of someone sitting near you, you don't need phase detection, but it's just what people think they need to have an all-round camera. And they're great all-round cameras.
Is there an explanation for the blacked out Lumix?
This is where we need to talk to our resident video expert.
I mean, the main thing is the reflections.
Right, okay.
So if you're shooting in a scene or something and you're getting kind of reflective surfaces in the shot, you can have a camera in shot and it's not going to be it's going to be more inconspicuous. Okay. That for me is the main reason why I like it. And also generally when I'm out shooting in a like a foreign country or something, I normally tape up the brand on my camera. With that I don't have to because people just don't really notice it. There's a couple of like secondary benefits. I think also on the L mount thing, you guys should mention that Blackmagic's newest camera is L mount as well. So it seems like that as a mount is a big thing that's happened this year as well as.
Yeah, this is true. Blackmagic now coming in and making a very, very high-end video camera in L mount.
All right.
So it would be nice to see L mount providing that bigger competition to the likes of Sony and Canon and Nikon. And being a larger part of the market, I think it's really healthy.
So Panasonic have given L mount a boost this year, but they've also given Micro Four Thirds a boost, haven't they? I think,
yes.
So to say.
Absolutely. And I think the G9 II is a really nice camera. It gives you a different balance of features than the S5 II, particularly in terms of you can use a small lightweight lens set and still cover a very broad range of focal lengths, and particularly if you want to shoot telephotos. You put a 100 to 400 millimeter lens on there. You've got 800 millimeter equivalent with a lens that weighs just a little over a kilogram. It is, for a certain type of photographer, a certain type of use, it's a really big deal. For travel, for wildlife, nature, having that ability to shoot very high quality, long focal lengths, lightweight, it's a big deal. And it's different from full frame, and it's still perfectly valid. It's still a system worth having.
And so it's always going to be the laws of physics, you can't avoid them. It's always going to be the benefit of a small sensor, such as Micro Four Thirds, that you have smaller lenses and it's going to be easier to take with you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're easier to provide things like effective image stabilization and so forth.
Yeah. And so Micro Four Thirds, people go on about full frame as if it's the only format worth having. But personally, I would usually rather shoot with a smaller format. So let's move on and let's talk about Leica. So Leica did some really nice cameras this year. They did a couple of variations on the M11. They made the M11 monochrome, and monochrome cameras are fabulous but very niche. And they did the M11M, which has got, M11P, which has got content credentials built in. So it's the first production camera that allows you to validate the content of your images, and people can check and see whether they've been edited and whether they've had any changes made to them. And that's an important new piece of technology. Sony are doing something similar, and I think that's something which we're going to see more and more over the coming couple of years. It's not there yet, but it's really interesting to see the start. But neither of those are Leica's best camera this year. Leica's best camera is the Q3, which is absolutely gorgeous. This is a full frame compact. It has a 60 megapixel sensor, 28 millimeter image stabilized lens, f1.7, amazing low light camera. It's now got a tilt screen, which is great for street shooting, which is something that you will do a lot with that kind of camera. It still feels a bit like you're using an M rangefinder because it's got analog controls. It feels like a proper Leica. It's just such a nice camera. It is very expensive. It's obviously because it's a Leica, but it is one of the nicest cameras that has come out this year.
There's something about Leicas that is hard to explain to someone. You have to like get them in your hand and use it, don't you? And think, wow, there's nothing on paper in any spec that explains why they're so great, why they're so nice. It's
just this beautiful stripped down simplicity that Leica has perfected. If you pick up Sony, you've got probably 70 pages of menus to wade through. On a Leica, you've got 6, and you're not missing anything. You don't look at it and think, oh, I haven't got this or I haven't got that. They're very, very good at stripping things down, taking out anything that you don't absolutely need, making a camera that's absolute joy to use and feels fantastic in your hand. And it's that, the way it can engage you in the process of taking pictures and make you want to pick up a camera and go out there and take pictures is really important. And the final camera I think that we need to talk about this year is the Sony A9 III. So Sony made quite a few cameras this year. They made a bunch of rangefinder style cameras in full frame and an APS-C. I don't really like them, so I don't think we're going to talk about them. We're going to actually concentrate on the A9 III because it's a world's first. It is the first camera with a global shutter. And this has made a lot of people very, very excited, so we need to kind of understand what is good about it and what isn't. So global shutter allows this camera to shoot at incredibly high frame rates with very fast shutter speeds and with zero image distortion from rolling shutter. What it means is that every single pixel on the sensor is read out simultaneously, so there's no jello effect when you're doing video, there's no skewing effect when you pan and photograph stills. Everything is perfect geometrically, and it can shoot at 120 frames per second in 24 megapixel RAW. So that's amazing. Why isn't every camera going to have a global shutter? And when we delve a little bit deeper into it, what we discover is there's a real image quality hit that's going to come with that. Your lowest ISO is ISO 250. The A9 II could do 100. Your top ISO on the A9 III is 25,600. The A9 II could do a stop higher. And it turns out that the way you make a global shutter work is effectively to split the pixels in half, and one half is dark. It's never exposed to light. So the active pixel is only half the size, or a bit less. And that means you're getting the image quality equivalent to an APS-C sensor. Now, this is a sports and action camera. You don't really care about base ISO image quality. It's absolutely fine. But for more general purpose cameras, this whole concept of a global shutter is going to come with compromises that a lot of people find unacceptable. So it's a great niche camera. It's incredible for its audience. It's purely for sports photography, for that kind of thing.
It's going to get rid of any banding problems with bad lighting and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So under artificial lighting, you'll see flickering. One thing that professional sports photographers have seen with conventional sensors, even kind of very fast stacked CMOS sensors, is odd effects in the advertising hoardings where you see blank lines and so on. None of that will happen on this camera. It's a step change for them, but it may not be a big deal for everyone else.
I guess it's always exciting when new tech comes out because people think, oh, it's going to filter down. But it's one of those bits of tech you probably don't want to filter down, particularly, or don't have no use for.
I also think it's going to be expensive. In this implementation, it's sitting on a stacked CMOS sensor, and we haven't seen particularly affordable cameras with stacked sensors. You have to use a smaller sensor for it to be affordable. So we've got the OM system OM1 at about £1,700 body only at the moment. That is the cheapest camera you've got, and it's micro four thirds. And you've got the Fujifilm X-H2S, which is APS-C at about £2,000. But full frame cameras with a stacked sensor are starting at about £4,000. And it's just going to be expensive technology. You don't necessarily have to use a stacked sensor with a global shutter, but the combination makes most sense.
Of course, the other kinds of cameras that we haven't talked about are the ones that are coming in everyone's phones, aren't they? And you've got some examples here of those, Josh.
Yeah. We've reviewed a lot of phones this year. There have been some really impressive releases. iPhone 15 series, Google Pixel 8 series, Samsung S23 series at the beginning of the year, so we're now sort of waiting for the next model. But yeah, in terms of phones this year, we've seen a lot of good ones. And then there's also folding phones, Techno Phantom Fold 5 I've got here. And they're kind of expensive basically, but you get a huge screen, and that is really good for viewing photos, viewing the internet. And if you're sort of someone who likes a tablet but doesn't want to have to carry one with you, then a folding phone can be a great sort of way to have both in your pocket. And normally there's a sort of compromise in the cameras. They would have maybe 2 cameras, whereas a flagship would have 3 or 4. Whereas now we're actually seeing with OnePlus and Google Pixel Fold, they're starting to put, and the Galaxy Fold, they're starting to put more emphasis on the cameras and putting 3 good cameras in the phone. So yeah, this one's OnePlus Open with Hasselblad, and it just, they are a premium product, and they do look good, they feel good, and now the camera should be doing a good job as well. And they just make things easy as well in terms of photography, particularly the Google Pixel series with long shutter exposure and astrophotography. You can just sort of point it at the stars and take a picture. You don't even need a tripod, and you can do waterfalls and don't need a tripod, and it just makes it so quick and so easy. And then the other thing is that it's point and shoot with great results. You know, you can use expensive cameras, but to really get the most out of them, you're going to be spending time diving into menus, trying to find the right settings, trying to do HDR on a lot of cameras still takes effort. It's not automatic. It's not just done for you. So yeah, I can see why people like using phones for cameras.
And even then, you're probably going to have to do some post work on a computer, aren't you, in Photoshop or whatever, with stuff off your camera to get it to look like.
Yeah.
And I was obviously in Shanghai recently and taking night shots of the skyline, and had my phone and I had the camera. And you know, if I didn't have access to a computer and I knew this was the final picture, you'd pick the phone shot every time, because you know that to get the camera shots to look anything like the phone shot, you're going to have to download it and fiddle around with it for a while, which not everyone wants to do. And
even budget phones, Google Pixel 7a doesn't cost a lot of money, and that also has all these features in, like low light photography and city nights scenes look amazing. And yeah, you would struggle with a cheap camera to get anywhere near as good results without spending a lot of time and effort with a tripod.
And I think this is the thing that, for the general punter, actually what matters in terms of image quality is not the same thing as enthusiast photographers, if you like, have generally focused on. Photographers have looked at things like high ISO noise and resolution with very high pixel counts and quality of lenses and so on. What most people care about is that your pictures are nicely exposed and that the colours are right and that the shadows and the highlights are balanced. They don't know what HDR is, but that's, they want to see that effect. And it's all there, it's all done. All this computational photography is making fantastic results incredibly easy. And that's something that camera makers are going to increasingly have to look at and work out how they can make these cameras come closer to producing the same level of finished result.
Yeah, because you're right. Obviously, once you start blowing it up, then that's where these cameras suddenly come into their own. But most people aren't going to do that. They're just looking at it on a screen, whether it be a tablet or whatever. They're not blowing them up to 100%. And at smaller sizes, the phone picture often is better, doesn't it? So yeah, camera manufacturers have got some catching up to do in that area, I think, for sure.
I think in terms of ease of use as well, the menu systems on cameras are, you can spend 5 or 10 minutes looking for a feature. On a phone, you don't have to. You've taken the photo and moved on by that point. And yeah, it's like camera manufacturers are kind of not really making much progress in this area.
Yeah, the moment every camera has a My menu on it that you're supposed to configure so that you can find the things you want to change, that's the mission of failure. That means the camera manufacturers have not got it right.
Okay, is that camera there for a reason?
Well, there have been some compact cameras released this year, and this is one of probably the better ones. It's still got a small sensor, but it is, tough, waterproof, GPS tracking. If you want something that can withstand anything, really, this will survive probably better than a phone. You can go swimming and not worry about salt water or dropping it off onto some rocks. A phone still is you can get waterproof ones, but they're still going to break if you drop them on something hard. So yeah, there is still a place for compact cameras, and they can get some amazing results, but you normally have to go for larger sensors, for the Ricoh, the Fuji, Leica, etc., to get the good image quality. But this is kind of like a nice middle point where you still get some good photos, and it does have some clever features, but yeah, you still have to go into the menus and find them and work them out.
So this is the OM System Tough TG7, which is the successor to Olympus Tough Compacts. And for quite a long time we did group tests of compact camera, underwater compacts, and the Olympus Toughs always won. And most of the other ones no longer on the market.
I was thinking that's the last man standing, isn't it, on the tough camera front? There used to be loads of them, didn't there?
Pentax released one this year, but it's identical to the Ricoh version they released last year, and it's still got full HD video, and it's like 2023 and doesn't have 4K. It just doesn't make sense.
Again, it's just the problem that camera manufacturers have clearly got is that because compact cameras are no longer selling in bulk, it's quite difficult for them to put the money into investing in new features and developing new stuff. So the TG7 is not radically different from the TG6, the Olympus TG6. Does it have any differences at all? I don't know.
There's a few little differences, a few improvements. It's got 4K video, so you're sort of okay there. You've got some manual controls, but there's not a massive amount of difference.
But it's still a really good camera for what it is.
Yeah, USB-C means, you can charge it anywhere now.
Okay, so is there anything we haven't talked about with missed out?
I think we've probably covered everything that we want to talk about in this video. So
we didn't talk about Canon.
Well, Canon haven't really done anything very interesting this year. Canon have made a bunch of cameras which are filling out their range at the more affordable end. So you've got the EOS R8, which is the affordable full frame. You've got the EOS R50, which is affordable APS-C. It's a very nice kind of little camera for creators. And you've got the EOS R100, which is pointless and shouldn't exist.
There's a Canon V10 as well, isn't there?
Oh, that's terrible. But again, one of your favourite cameras.
It's a kind of love-hate camera, and there's a lot of stuff that kind of makes sense, but then a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense. It's got a built-in stand, so maybe if you're recording some music and just want to leave it and record your band while you play, great. But if you want to use it for walking around, the image stabilization just isn't good enough.
It's basically a camera that you have to use in exactly the way Canon think you should use it.
The stupidest thing about it is that this has a non-removable battery, so that if it's a vlogging camera, once the battery dies, it's just a paperweight because you can't do anything with it anymore.
You've got to spend an hour charging it before you can take another 50 minutes of video.
Yeah, that is a weird. That's a
Maybe
weird
you're
one.
supposed to buy two and alternate them. You can buy one in each colour.
But in defence of the mirrorless cameras, though, and it's easy to be elitist because we obviously are getting these cameras tested. We're testing all these great cameras, but they're phenomenally expensive. And like the Z8's a fantastic camera, but I'm not sure I would spend $4,000 on, or have the $4,000 to. I don't think my wife would be very happy if I spent $4,000 on a new camera. So Canon, I think, they're being quite shrewd. It may not be very exciting when you compare it with the Z8 or Alpha A9 III or whatever. But they are filling an area of the market which is important, which is the lower end, cheaper, more affordable cameras, isn't it? So that's
and these are cameras which we're going to look at and say they're not as great as their more expensive siblings, which have got more bells and whistles. but they're very competent cameras. They're typical Canon. They work really well. They deliver nice results. They're quite easy to use. They're well thought through. They're just not terribly exciting.
I think the problem with the Canon EOS R100 is that it's around £700 and it doesn't have a tilting screen, it doesn't have a touch screen. And if you were buying a camera from Panasonic or Olympus, you would get these things. You'd get a touch screen, you'd get a tilting screen.
It's basically an RF mount version of the EOS M50 that we saw about 2018, I think that came out. Internally, it's almost the same. It's taken steps backwards in terms of usability. It says it's for people who are supposed to be stepping up from a smartphone, but then it doesn't have a touchscreen. So you're pressing buttons to make all the changes. And you don't really have very many lenses to work with. The lens that they put on it is the extremely boring kit zoom that doesn't go very wide. It's 18 to 45 millimeter, that's 28 to 70-ish equivalent. Everyone has got a smartphone which has got a more interesting range of lenses and is used to touch controls. It just doesn't seem to make much sense.
But if you want a mirrorless camera and you're on a budget, and it basically does, if you're not fussed about the bells and whistles, the touchscreen and stuff. I mean, I personally don't really use. I forget my cameras have got touchscreen on them. I don't use them so much. Then I guess it does the job as a way into interchangeable lens photography, isn't it? Or you could spend the money and buy something better second hand.
Yeah, I think you would go for Fujifilm. You've got a much wider range of lenses. There's a lot of second-hand options out there. XT30 Mark II, XS10, XS20. All would be a nicer place to start than a Canon EOS R100.
Exactly. You can't really go wrong. If you're basically buying into APS-C as a format, buy into Fujifilm X system, loads of beautiful cameras, loads of lenses, better results. You will very, very quickly get limited by Canon's RFS lens range. You've got almost anything you like if you go into Fuji.
Of course, the other big thing to say about Canon is it's one thing to make affordable, cheap mirrorless cameras, but if you can only ever buy Canon RF lenses, because they don't allow third parties to make lenses, those lenses are quite expensive, then it almost like, a camera system's more than just the body, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if you haven't got the affordable lenses to go with it, then it's pointless making affordable bodies.
I think there will be people that want a Canon camera because, Canon have a certain reputation. They do great colors. They take great photos, make really nice images. So there will be people that want the Canon EOS R100, but it feels like it's a stepping stone to the next model up, and you'll get a much better camera at the next level up, but then that's quite a bit more money.
I think it is literally that. It's the camera where Canon want you to go into the camera shop and ask for that, but they really want to sell you the R50, which is a much better camera, but more expensive. And if you've got the money, it's a much nicer camera.
So there we go. That's 2023 in a nutshell. All the cameras. So I'm looking forward to 2024 because I think we're going to see because there's a couple of brands that have been quite quiet in 2023 that may be saving their stuff, keeping their powder dry for next year. So we'll see what comes. But in the meantime, that's basically a summary of the best cameras and maybe not so best cameras of 2023. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video if you enjoyed it. And do leave your comments below. We'd love to see what you say about our videos. And if you have any interesting questions, we'll try our best to answer them.